Or if we could.
Hello, my name is Margaret Burr. I'm the Director of Creative Learning at the Dubuque Museum of Art. Welcome to a conversation with Curator Anna Fariello, held in conjunction with the museum's third Craft Invitational on exhibition through October 2nd. The Craft Invitational highlights a select group of regional artists who are pushing boundaries in ceramic, glass, metal, paper, textile, and wood. The works in this exhibition show how ordinary materials in skilled hands are transformed into extraordinary works of art. A sincere thank you to Dupaco Credit Union for their sponsorship of the exhibition. And a note to our attendees, questions may be directed to Anna following her talk. Eva Schmidt, our marketing manager, will take your questions, which you can submit in chat. Eva will ask Anna your questions, or if you wish, she will call on you and you can ask Anna yourself. Please indicate your preference when you send the question. Volumes have been written about art with discussions of craft, often an afterthought. Art history's use of painting as the standard classification left three-dimensional works such as crafts, ceramics, and sculpture fighting for their rightful place with the same status as the painted image. Anna Fariello's talk, Making and Naming, the Lexicon of Studio Craft, challenges today's art world vision and is sure to spark a debate. Curator and scholar Anna Fariello is a former Smithsonian Renwick Fellow in American craft. Her research at the Smithsonian focused on the Southern craft revival and led to her work with Western Carolina University, where she developed the online archive, Craft Revival, Shaping Western North Carolina, Past and Present. The author of 8 books, numerous book chapters and articles, she has presented over 150 conference papers and invited lectures, and directed over 30 federal, state, and private grants. Fariello has been honored with the 2010 Brown-Hudson Award from the North Carolina Folklore Society, a 2013 Guardians of Culture Award from the Association of Tribal Archives and Museums, a 2016 Preservation Excellence Award from the North Carolina Preservation Consortium, and a 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southern Highland Craft Guild. Anna lives in Cullowhee, North Carolina. So please join me in welcoming Anna Fariello.
Oops, okay, I have to admit someone. Okay. Thank you, Margaret, for the nice introduction, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk. Congratulations to the artists, included in the Dubuque Museum of Arts Craft Invitational. This talk is derived from 2 different book chapters. If you're interested further, I included the book titles toward the end of the talk. Making and Naming builds on ideas that have informed my writing and curating from the very earliest of my career. It is based on the premise that craft suffers from a disadvantage being discussed in art historical terms that are based primarily on painting and 2-dimensional art. It has been a theme I have returned to time and time again. You will see my talk may not provide us with as many answers as it does questions. I hope it can encourage us to think about a better system to discuss craft through a critical lens that considers craft's strengths and attributes. It's meant to be provocative to encourage us to think about craft in new ways. The question. I used to think it was possible to carry on a deeper conversation about craft using the formalized language shared by history, aesthetics, and criticism. I no longer believe this. For a meaningful discussion, craft as a field cannot be shoehorned into the Cinderella slipper of a language based on principles of what was once called fine art. For those interested in the history of 3-dimensional objects, art history lacks an appropriate language and system of evaluation. Paul Greenhow, as curator of ceramics at the Victoria and Albert Museum, quipped, "Ceramics is occasionally the subject of art history, but more often is its victim. The very term fine art negates the egalitarian values of craft and its influence upon the visual arts. For such debates to be productive, craft must have its own discipline-specific vocabulary, one grown organically from its own processes. The essence of craft is bound to the hand, to the process of working, of making, beginning with imagination and laying out the parameters of design. It is the skill of the hand that results in a thing well made, a thing that rightfully can claim the title of craft. There is no, is that thing in the way of my slide? I'm sorry, that line, I guess it is.
No, you're fine.
Okay. I'm gonna stop my video. Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. There is no clear line partitioning craft from art, like a highway sign that marks the state line. You are now leaving the world of art and entering the brave new world of craft. Rather, notions of what constitutes craft and art form a fluid continuum as part of the larger spectrum of material culture. But even a view of craft and art along a continuous line does not provide easy answers. One reason for this difficulty is that the issue is too complex to be answered as either an either-or question. Is it craft? Is it art? The craft-related continuum is not constructed along a single line, but is interwoven from multiple strands of thought, assumptions, and practices. There are some who think that craft and art are a matter of quality, that these terms are not nouns, but qualitative adjectives. An art history professor once responded, when I argued for a language of craft, that good craft is art anyway. Well, I agree that good craft is certainly art. I hope to show that the identity of craft embraces more than art. The intention of this paper is to untangle the multiple strands of ideas that inform the identity of craft at a particular point along the continuum of material expression. For want of a better term, I will call this point studio craft. Studio craft is not a new term. Others have used it in their attempt to devise a way to describe a certain approach to making, embracing more than simplistic and superficial definitions. In 1940, Bernard Leach, in a Potter's book, defined, quote, a new type of craftsman called individual, studio, or creative. A new type of pottery, the result of an immensely broadened outlook, unquote. Studio craft is not the craft of hobby crafters, nor the mass production of craft retailers. On the other hand, studio craft is not the craft who those have abandoned the term altogether, substituting the misnomer design for craft itself. I was devastated when the Museum of American Craft changed to craft and design. Design is a well-respected intermediary, the working out of problems that stand between concept and execution. Still, design is but a plan and does not necessarily include the skillful making that results in a finely finished piece. Craft departs from its corollaries, art and design, in its embrace of execution, the making of a work. Design is but 1/3 of the creative triad that informs studio craft. The making of an object is a key attribute of studio craft. While some would require the hand making of a work as necessary for the object to be called craft, not all craftsmen agree. Quote, "We cannot fake craft. It lies in the act," unquote. So wrote Mary Carolyn Richards in her 1960s era book, Centering, a work that proposed a philosophical and theoretical foundation for craft practice and facilitated the development of craft as a professional field of inquiry. Richards went on to say what she meant about not being able to fake craft, explaining how, quote, "The strains we have put in the clay break open in the fire," unquote. Anyone who's ever worked in pottery knows exactly what that sentence means. Craft objects are telling. Beautiful or not, they are a record of what went on in the studio between maker and material. If the maker was at odds with the material, in the way Richards suggests, the work at some point will reveal the truth of its making. Every mark in clay, wood, stone, fiber, glass, pigment, or metal is the archaeological evidence of an action taken by its maker. The object is a document that embodies a material reenactment of studio craft practice. On the economic continuum, a work of art generally outpaces a work of craft in most cases. We accept this as a truism of our time, although this circumstance is based on specific notions of art compared to a more vague understanding of what is meant by craft. How fortunate for art that an inherent part of its identity is that it is considered genuine, expressive, and good. Somehow, the word art implies good art. If one wants to talk about bad art, you better preface your description accordingly. Art compared to craft seldom includes amateur or hobbyist art. We seldom think about the mass-produced art found on urban streets, the art depicted on greeting cards, the art that fills kitschy gift shops, or hotel art. To its credit, art insinuates a rarefied form, with samples found in museums and history books. Craft, to its detriment, is often thought as the smallest trinket, something produced in quantity with little forethought. But what qualities prop up these perceptions, and are they valid? For the sake of this discussion, comparisons made here use the best of each genre. The best of craft, like the best of art, can be beautiful, inspiring, challenging, intriguing, compelling. The roots of studio craft can be traced to the methods of making used to produce the earliest human-made aesthetic objects. Much of manual work and all artistic practice fell within what we would call craft process today. Throughout history and up into the Middle Ages, the making of any object was centered in a cottage industry, whether pottery or painting on pottery. Objects were made in similar ways in terms of the scale of production. Individuals, families, neighbors, clans, small numbers of people worked together to produce a particular type of object. With industrialization, craft production changed, not so much as a product, but as a way of working. Early in the Industrial Revolution, change was evident in how weavings, for example, were made. Weaving moved from the privacy of the home, where a single loom was commonly found beside the home hearth, to undergo the most dramatic changes of any of the crafts at the time. With the invention of the steam-powered loom in the 18th century, followed by the introduction of a wool combing machine, the meditative and personal environment of the home loom gave way to the cacophony of the factory floor. In contrast to the individual craftsmen working holistically on a product, factory workers were considered operatives who completed a single operation in a series, a system that became known as the division of labor. On the factory floor, craft process was forced to abandon its traditional roots, leaving behind aesthetic expression, craftsmanship, and control in favor of standardization, efficiency, and quantity. Moreover, industrial process removed the hand manu from manufacture, leaving facture to make as the root of the word factory. Manufacture, handmade, taking out the hand and leaving just the word factory. With this new environment stripped of the human touch, design was also moved off the factory floor, fracturing the holistic craft process while breaking apart the operations of production. In 1861, William Morris founded a company with a very long subtitle, quote, "Fine Art Workmen in Painting, Carving, Furniture, and Metals." Combining fine art with workmen in painting, with carving, furniture, and metals, Morris is a good example of how naming conveys the intent of studio craft practice and its evolutionary development. This 19th century union of art and craft, as promoted by the English arts and crafts movement, was immediately eclipsed by the seduction of modernism in the early 20th century. Modernism, for all its democratic rhetoric, excluded most attributes of studio craft in its celebration of individual expression. Surrealists defined art as cerebral. Abstraction deemed it self-referential. Futurists proclaimed it ahistorical. Dadists claimed it was immaterial. Cubists approached it as analytical. One might go so far as to say that at this juncture, craft and art stretched to opposite poles along the craft art continuum. During the same period, studio craft remained tactile rather than cerebral, functional rather than self-referential, traditional rather than iconoclastic, material rather than immaterial, holistic rather than analytical, and social rather than individual. And I've long struggled with identifying attributes of craft that are ignored by the art historical canon. For the growing dominance of the aesthetic mainstream, craft went underground. Its ideals formed upstream tributaries that flowed into a swelling of interest that remained outside the modernist art world. Despite the dominance of modernist hierarchies in the fine arts, the proliferation of Morris societies, the Craftsman magazine, and a growing number of craft promoters and producers were evidence of the Ruskin-Morris vision everywhere. Gustav Stickley's Morris chair promised functionality and honest construction. The production of mission furniture with its hallmarks of heft and exposed construction was widespread. Louis Comfort Tiffany adapted the quintessential medieval art form of stained glass to domestic application in the American Northeast. The Midwest saw the development of a new kind of factory, such as Cincinnati's Rookwood Pottery Company, which produced a new kind of art pottery not subject to the strict division of labor, although in truth, most pieces were not made wholly by a single individual. Utopian communities like Rose Valley in Pennsylvania were founded in pursuit of a holistic lifestyle based on quality craftsmanship. In Philadelphia, Samuel Yellen adapted the Gothic style to 20th century metalwork to create an imposing sense of significance to public buildings of a still young country. In the Mountain South, craft advocates like William Frost and Alan Eaton promoted handwork as evidence of a purely American culture. By the early 20th century, studio craft continued to be made outside the art historical canon, and certainly outside of its history books, to thrive in decentralized pockets of creative activity. Those of us who went through the university in the latter half of the 20th century were trained to define craft less by its making and more by its use, in contrast to the objective and distanced present of art that was analyzed as a fait accompli. But that can craft and art be subdivided in other ways? In The Shape of Time, a 1962 text by George Kubler, divided visual culture into three rather unorthodox categories. He grouped paintings, textiles, and mosaics into a category of planes and labeled sculpture as solids. Containers, which he called envelopes, included architecture and pottery. Kubler's categories depended on function as something he recognized in all forms of art. But for Kubler, function related to the geometry of the object rather than its use, quote, ignoring the traditional distinction of fine, minor, useless, and useful arts. Function, the way I define it, is an abstract attribute of material expression. For example, the envelope of containment can represent protection or possession, the way a cozy room or comfortable coat envelops the body, satisfying basic human needs. The ability to hold, to save, and to possess are functional attributes. Considering the first human-made objects, a container may have been the most valuable possession a family could own. Containers separated the precious from the ordinary, the valued from the valueless. We save, we store, we sometimes hoard, and certainly we isolate certain possessions apart from others. It is this abstract concept of function that supports the identity of studio craft. As such, the notion of containment is useful for theorizing and articulating function as an abstraction apart from the physical reality of utility. Indeed, to understand the material aesthetic object, whether art or craft, the meaning of function cannot be limited to use alone. Function exists in the realm of the metaphysical, while use can be understood in physical terms. Does a teapot pour? Does it drip? For a building, function is more about performance. Of Kugler's envelope of architecture, the primary criterion for evaluating use would be whether the roof kept out the rain. But its function? The function of a federal courthouse is to inspire confidence in the judicial system it supports. Likewise, a cathedral impresses the faithful with the power of the Almighty. On a smaller scale, the use of a quilt may be as a bed cover, but its function is greater than the sum of its component pieces to encompass the autobiographical story of its making, its maker, and the entire quilt tradition. Aside from its use as a bed cover, its function embraces the quilt as a document of a family's cast-off clothing, as metaphor, the double meaning of providing warmth, as ritual and its use on special occasions, or as a talisman, a healing or protective cover. Thus, the multiple functions of an object exist apart from its use and are made up of abstracted and layered intangible meaning rather than full properties alone. And I kind of have a footnote here. The idea that craft could be analyzed metaphysically was introduced to me by Rose Slivka, who was the longtime editor of Craft Horizons, the now defunct magazine of the American Craft Council. Slivka curated a 1977 exhibition for the Renwick Gallery titled The Object as Poet. Since 1943, with the founding of the American Craft Council, craft in America has almost been exclusively defined by 5 media: clay, wood, fiberglass, metal. This means that potters, woodworkers, weavers, smiths, and glassblowers were counted as craftsmen, but others were not. But tradition has not always grouped makers, according to the American Craft Council definitions. By virtue of church commissions, painters in Leonardo's day were plasterers as well. Italian biographer Giorgio Vasari counted goldsmiths in with sculptors. As the world became more mechanized, weavers found themselves at the forefront of industry. So too, roles defined by technique are problematic in delineating craft. An internationally renowned sculptor, for example, uses the same welding techniques as an auto mechanic. Something other than technique or material must contribute to the identity of craft. So much of today's writing about craft is predicated upon a definition used based on material selection, the 5 craft media. However, this simplistic, albeit convenient, definition misses the point. A workable definition of craft depends very little on technique or medium at all. Craft as a discipline is not so much about materials as it is about an approach to materials. My own view of the craft art continuum is on a sliding scale, with imagination and skill part of every creative act. Art is imagination, with or without skill. Craft is skill, with or without imagination. Studio craft, the best term we have thus far, identifies a particular point on this continuum, the place where imagination and vision meet skill and craftsmanship. Mindfully made, craft process and objects deserve to be named. Although the vocabulary of art history can be used to explore some aspects of studio craft, it is not sufficient to embrace its multiple meanings. Craft's multiple interpretations as document, ritual, metaphor, and talisman depend upon attributes that define core values that makers bring into the studio every day. Thank you.
Thank you,
There's
Anna,
no
very much.
audience.
Thank you, Anna. I think we'll turn it over to Eva and see if we have some questions from our attendees.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, I guess, let me change my view here. Feel free to put them in the chat, and you can either and let us know if you would like to read them yourself and interact, or if you would like me to read the question. Or you can always pop on with your camera and ask. Just open the chat here. No questions? Margie, did you have any questions?
I have one question. How do we communicate the value of craft to young people, and how do we encourage young makers?
That's such an interesting question. I can't tell you that. I remember an American Craft Conference, like, I swear it was 2 decades ago, and we were asking that question. That has been really an ongoing question for the field. That was before I was gray, and we were talking about the graying of the field. I think it's really difficult to compete with such a fast world where craft is a slow process for most makers. It's not slapdash. It takes a while to master the craft itself, and then the actual making is usually takes a lot of patience. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I know that here in North Carolina, we're working on a project called the Blue Ridge Craft Trails, which is basically focusing not so much on the object, but on the experience of craft, where people are, it's like an online map, and you can visit all these different studios and chat with the artist and have this experience. Sometimes it's actually hands-on. And what we have found, we've done a lot of studies to find what, in particular, millennials would appreciate. And we found that they appreciate craft as part of a more generalized experience. And so we've kind of had them go from a studio to a brewery, and adding in these other activities. So I don't know, that has worked for us, but in some ways it's not encouraging, because I would like to see craft sort of stand on its own. And I guess I would say one other thing. I think that up until now, the field has really focused on the object. And, of course we want to make beautiful and compelling things, but I think the public is really interested in the experience of craft, the watching, the engagement, the engagement with creativity that they would not usually have on their own.
Thank you.
We did get a question in from Louise, and this also, Stacy, I think if you're still on, also directed at you as well. Have any invited artists asked not to be included in the exhibition labeled craft? So, Stacy, did you catch that?
I did, yeah. So I was trying to think of one or two, or if any had, and Dolores, if Dolores wants
In
to
that
jump
book,
in here
Objects and
too.
Meaning,
What's that?
I was going to say, in the book Objects and Meaning that I flashed up there, one of the chapters in that book was all about the C word, as if it were. It was a pretty
if it's
interesting
bad.
chapter about how craft had this negative connotation.
Right, which I don't think it should have, of course. I only ever have encountered, and this is our third craft invitational, only encountered that one time with a glass artist who didn't consider their work to be craft. But otherwise, I haven't really. In this show, there are maybe a couple artists who maybe don't consider their work or don't consider their work under the idea of craft, but their work is definitely inspired by the material aspect of craft. And so it definitely fits in, or even crosses that transition between what some people consider craft to art. But if Dolores or Carol want to jump in on that from past experience, please do.
Louise says, thank you. Unless anyone wants to dive in more on that, we did get another question from Marianne. How do you think about new digital technologies in relationship to studio craft, especially in light of what you said about decentralizing the object?
I think digital technologies, that's just a tool. And if anything, I think it reinforces what my talk is trying to say, that craft isn't so much about these things that we think it is, the material especially. It's so much more about our approach to the material, what we want to get out of the material, how we elevate that material. And I think that we will see more digital methods of making. I don't really have any problem with that.
See it. That's all the questions we have, at least in the chat for now. So if anyone has any more, feel free to type those in or pop on here with your, if you want to ask in person, you can do that too.
I have a question. I put myself on hide, by the way, and now I can't find my way back, so my apologies. Anna, what inspires you about the craft world today?
Me?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
You're
please.
talking to me?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I am enamored with process, and well, and also I'm, as you could see from my talk, I'm very interested in history and sort of the progression of how we got to where we are today. I think we're in a much better place today than we were, say, when I was in school, where craft was really had a, for no reason, had such a negative connotation, and other artists look down on craft. But what's happened today is so many quote fine artists are using craft material. I mean, it's become a very fluid world out there, and as I think it should be. And you notice, I mean, I really hammer on this idea of craft needs its own language and stuff, but I call craft makers artists. I don't distinguish creativity on that level. So I think I think in some ways we're headed in the right direction. One of the things that does bother me is the earlier question. I do think there are craft artists who want to get away from that word altogether. And as I said, the American Museum of Craft and Design of art and design, you know, to abandon the word. I mean, this is the #1 craft museum in, you know, on the eastern seaboard, say, and to abandon its own definition, rather than working hard to think about what craft brings to that museum, as opposed to the Museum of Modern Art. I think that's a missed opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. Like I said,
I do think if people want to turn their microphones on, if they have something to actually say rather than just a question,
yeah,
I'd be up for that.
Yeah, hi, hope you can hear me. This is Carol Spellich. I had some comments. I'm sorry I'm so slow, Anna, but the question that Margie asked about young people and getting involved, I've pretty much just retired from teaching at the university level. And I'm very sorry to report that 20-year-olds want to have a career where they can make a boatload of money. And they don't think you can do that as a craftsperson. And I think that's really a huge barrier. And I think it's the same thing, like I call my plumbing guy and they're like, we can see you in 3 weeks because nobody wants to be a plumber anymore. But plumbers are making a boatload of money. Craftspeople can make a boatload of money and have like a wonderful, rich lifestyle too. So I think this is really a matter of communicating, like, yes, you can have a great career and you can be successful and you can be rewarded because you're making beautiful things. So I just wanted to put that out there that a craftsperson does not have to be a starving artist in any way. And again, sorry to be like so late into the conversation, but thank you.
No, that's a great point, Carol. And I think that's definitely one of the obstacles to young people going into craft, especially because what they see for a lot of people moving out of the field is that they did operate on their passion so strongly and were willing to sacrifice making a living, making a decent living, I guess. So I think that's an important point. Anyone else? Well, thank you. Margaret, you have anything?
Yeah, I just thank you,
Yeah, I'm
Anna. Thank you so much. Thank you, attendees. Remind you that the craft invitational is at the Dubuque Museum of Art through October 2nd. For more information and to learn more about the exhibiting artists, please visit our website at dbqart.org. And we look forward to seeing you at the Dubuque Museum of Art. Happy fall.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.